and welcome to the Wellness with Juanita podcast. I'm your host, Juanita Nagai, an American living in Japan for 20 years. I've gone through some massive life changes and crises in my 20 years here. At its bleakest, I felt very isolated, alone, and helpless in the face of what was happening. I relied on alcohol and cigarettes to get through it the best I knew how, which worked until it didn't, and everything fell apart. I made it through with a little help from my friends, a fledgling mindfulness practice, and learning how to become my own strongest ally. I quit drinking and smoking, worked my way through my grief, found ways to forgive, created new connections, and started a regular exercise, meditation, and self-care routine. I've also become a national board certified health and wellness coach along the way, and developed a desire and passion to help others on their own personal journeys. This podcast is all about change, growth, healing yourself, learning how to get back up after life kicks you down, and exploring mindfulness and self-compassion as incredible tools available to each and every one of us to do just that. Hello, and welcome to the Wellness with Juanita podcast. I'm your host, Juanita Nagai. Today, I will be talking about the power of positivity, and that may cause some of you, the more cynical or more jaded amongst us, to perhaps immediately roll our eyes or heave an inward sigh, thinking about things like toxic positivity, or thinking, I'm going to sit here and talk about how you just need to look at the glass as half full as opposed to half empty, and life will be great. There is definitely way more involved and way more to it than simply that. And I will touch on all of those things, I hope, today. But I think there is a lot more power and a lot more truth behind that simple thought that the way we do look at things, the way that we do understand how the world works, or how our minds work, or even simply maybe the way that we are fundamentally as a person living their life on the planet, there is a lot to be said for the simple power of our mindset and how we do look at things. And before I get too far down the mindset road, I wanted to give a little bit of a brief introduction to our kind of collective genetic predisposition towards negativity. As humans, we are actually genetically predisposed towards a negativity bias. I don't know if you have ever thought about this or reflected about this, but I myself have actually found myself wondering at various times in my life, not necessarily, is there something wrong with me, but more a kind of, oh my gosh, am I so intellectually focused, or am I so completely wrapped up in my own mind and in my own internal awareness and thought processes that I am constantly looking for something to work on or something to be wrong. Like when things were simply feeling pretty good or feeling peaceful, I would find these other things that my mind would be drawn to. And those were always usually negative things, or things that I still felt unfulfilled by, or things that I wanted to do, or, different aspects of different relationships that could be better. And I can distinctly remember at a few different points in my life wondering, am I just doing this to myself? Can I not just simply be content and happy with how things are? Am I truly just making things harder than they need to be because some fault of my own? I have learned in the course of my life and in the course of my studies and things like my mindfulness practice that I think that was a symptom or an aspect of the negativity bias manifesting itself in my life. I truly was looking for what was wrong because that is how my brain has evolved to function. So, if you think about millennia ago, as humans were, living in caves or traversing the plains of savannah, the ancestors that were able to protect themselves from danger and survive are the ones that passed on their genes all the way down through to us. Okay. So we placed greater emphasis on negative events and negative experiences versus the positive ones. So if you think of finding a food source and remembering where that food source is, even though food is tremendously important and obviously very necessary for our survival, if we got eaten by a saber-toothed tiger, it didn't really matter where the food was the next day. So we got very, very good at looking for the dangerous things and keeping our eyes and our ears open and our senses fine tuned for threats and for dangers and things that we need to be aware of. Over the millennia, we just continued to fine tune and hone in on that skill. However, today, most of us live in first world, comfortable, modern nations, and we do not have to face threats to our very survival very often. We have things like food and shelter and warmth provided for us in essence, and we really don't need to worry about all of the dangers and the threats in the natural world. Unfortunately, that genetic predisposition is still there. We are still biologically hardwired to be looking for the dangers and the threats and the things that are wrong with our lives. And what that means for most of us these days is that we don't necessarily make them up, but we do stick to the things that we would like to be a little bit better, or the faults or flaws that we think that we have. So we're not looking for the saber-toothed tiger anymore, but we are noticing the 10 pounds that we would like to lose, or we're noticing when our partner ignored us, or when our children backtalked us, or when our boss offered one piece of constructive feedback during a performance review. We will cling to that one negative thing and, in essence, kind of brush off or forget the other perhaps 95% positive things that happened or were said. So this negativity bias is something that we all grapple with and we all deal with as human beings. It's not just you, it's not a personalized thing. I do believe that people probably exist on a spectrum of kind of natural optimism or pessimism. I feel like I probably lean towards the more optimistic and positive side in general, but that certainly doesn't mean that I don't fixate on negative experiences or negative things because it's just part of being human. It's just part of who I am. I also believe, though, that learning about this and putting this awareness around what is happening in both the kind of intellectual and educated way. So, by learning about the psychology behind this, but also in an experiential way through my mindfulness practice. Anyone that has attempted meditation for any amount of time will quickly find that our thoughts just interrupt. They come into our heads unbidden. Even the most experienced meditators, I am told, continue to struggle with this or continue to experience this. our thoughts come as they come, and some of them are negative, and some of them are positive, and some of them are neutral. And as we start to practice noticing that phenomenon and noticing those things coming in and noticing those things happening, we start to bring more and more awareness to the fact that that is happening. And we don't get as wrapped up or swept away or carried away with perhaps that negative thought pattern or that rumination, that thing that you're worried about that you just keep going over and over and over again in your head. The more that you realize that is what you're actually doing, the easier it is to recognize that, acknowledge it, and let it go. So I think it's important to kind of lay all that out there, that this is a natural tendency for humans. As Dr. Rick Hansen has said, the mind is, or the brain is like Teflon for positive experiences and like Velcro for negative ones. So we really do not place as much emphasis or value on the positive things that happen in our life or the positive experiences or feelings that we feel, because we are so biologically predisposed to favor the negative ones and to prioritize those. So I think knowing all of that speaks to how very important it is to recognize that if we want to experience more positive emotions and if we want to cultivate them and benefit from the power that they bring us, then we really need to actually cultivate them, and we really need to make them intentional practices, or really kind of think about how we can kind of get the most bang for our buck from our happy moments or our positive feelings, or when we do experience things like hope and love and wonder and interest and amusement and inspiration and all of these positive emotions that really are what make life worth living. They don't just happen automatically and naturally. They certainly can and do, but they're very, very slippery, and they're very, very easy to lose in a sense, unless we kind of bring some intentionality and some conscious awareness to when we are experiencing them or to when they are happening. And the more that we practice doing those kinds of things, the more our brains are then trained to look for them. And then the more that we can practice experiencing them or extending the moment, the better and better that we get at that. And the more we notice, and the more we will actually remember and experience and feel. I just wanted to mention that I think it's so very natural and so very common, again, in our modern, luxurious, first world lives, that a lot of the people that I work with, a lot of my clients, a very common thread is people feeling guilty for not feeling grateful enough, or people feeling like they are not good enough or doing enough. We feel like we're letting ourselves down, like we thought we would be doing bigger, better, different things by this point in our lives, or we look back to the past version of ourselves with rose-tinted glasses and think about the things that we used to be able to do. But I think that we feel what we feel. There's no stopping it, much like the thoughts that enter into our minds. We can't really prevent them or stop them or control them. They come and they go. Likewise, our emotions, they come and they go. what we do is add a lot of extra baggage and stories onto those thoughts or onto those emotions often. And that is what will extend them or carry them through hours, days, weeks, months, and years, is the story that we add on after the fact. But I believe that we feel what we feel and we experience our emotions as they come, and they all have a place. And I think they all have something to teach us if we start to pay attention and we start to learn how to listen to not only our feeling and mental selves, but also our physical bodies and what they have to tell us. Um, but all of these things, this is why I'm definitely not talking about toxic positivity. This is why I'm talking about kind of more like feeling all the feels, but being aware that we are much more likely to feel the negative feels or to remember or to place priority and emphasis on the negative feels than the positive ones. And so, again, this is why it's important that we start to build up our kind of positive awareness muscle and cultivate those positive emotions and nourish them and nurture them, because they are what I believe we are here to do. I think we are here to love and connect and support each other and to grow and to become the best versions of ourselves. We're not here to contract and feel bad about ourselves and place unreasonable demands on ourselves or others for that matter. And so if we get completely subsumed in the negative, and I think all of us can probably think of at least one or two people that that description might apply to. The people that are just constantly always having bad luck or a bad time, or life is always getting them down and nothing ever seems to go their way. Again, we feel what we feel, and I think it's important that we feel the full range of emotions and experiences. But even in our darkest moments and our most difficult times, there is still light and there is still good. And there are still moments throughout our days that I believe we can learn to slow down so that we can start to recognize them and notice them when they happen, so that we can then begin to realize the vast, rich tapestry of experiences and emotions that are available to us at any time. This is obviously one of those easier said than done things, but this is why I believe it's a practice. I think things like gratitude are an amazing tool and an amazing antidote to feeling hopeless or despairing. It's really hard to feel hopeless or despairing if you're feeling grateful. And we can learn how to look for moments to feel grateful for throughout our days. So things like simple gratitude practices. I go on and on about this, but it really, really is so simple and it can be so powerful. And the benefits are so numerous that it is absolutely worth it, I think, for every single person to just start playing around with it and figuring out how it might work best for them. I personally write down 3 things that I'm grateful for at the end of every night. Even if I'm tired or exhausted. And when I am feeling kind of tired and exhausted, it is more difficult to kind of to go there and to maybe tap into, okay, what good thing did happen today? What was I grateful for? What did today have going for it? But once I get there, that experience and that feeling automatically does kind of take me out of potentially negative states or negative feelings. Once I think the sunset from the deck on my house, or the way that my kids were laughing together and cracking each other up playing some game, or my husband going grocery shopping and starting dinner so I didn't have to, or even, like whatever it is, they can be big, they can be small, but it's training our brain. I mean, besides just feeling good when you recall them and you bring them to mind, that's a little burst of dopamine and feel good hormones in our bodies. But also, the practice of doing that is what starts to bring more of that gratitude into our everyday. Like your brain and your mind is just ready to look for all of the good things because it's thinking, well, maybe I'll write that down later. Even if you don't write it down later, your mind is looking for more of them to note, okay? So things like a daily gratitude practice are a simple way to start to try and tap into positive emotions and trying to cultivate them and reinforce them and create stronger neural pathways in our brains to start looking for those positive experiences as opposed to getting stuck on the negative ones. If you think about the kind of biggest and best positive emotions, things like love and awe and inspiration and wonder, serenity, we can think about different times in our lives when we have experienced them. We can write those stories down. Writing has an incredible, powerful psychological function. So writing things down, especially by hand, can really help to cement the experiences in our mind. But even sharing those stories or sharing those experiences with your friends and family can have a powerful effect. By sharing those positive emotions, we are recollecting them for ourselves, but then we're also kind of sharing that with other people as well. If we just simply start to slow down and provide ourselves with the opportunities to notice those positive moments or those inspiring times throughout our day where we just look up and we just see an incredibly beautiful sky with the sun shining down through the clouds, or the butterfly that floats by the window, or whatever it is. If we're constantly rushing and always busy and always thinking about the next three things that we have to do before we're even to them, like if we're not even in the moment and focusing or concentrating on what we're doing right now, right here, but we're thinking like 10 steps ahead, just hearing that, just think about how much you're going to miss. You're not even in the moment of what you're doing in that moment. How are you going to notice moments of wonder or moments of joy or moments of serenity, right? And maybe some of you are saying, but I can't, like, I'm just too busy. I just don't have the time. Refer to my previous podcast about making the time, because as the old meditation saying goes, there's a kind of proverb about meditation that says you should meditate every day for at least 20 minutes, unless you're busy, in which case you should meditate for 40. And it's really, really true. The more rushed and pressured and stressed and intense we feel, the more we need to slow down. And it might feel really difficult to do. It might feel even like an impossible task, but it's very, very crucial and it's very, very important. And there are ways to do it that aren't as difficult as you might think. I do believe that there are ways that we can start to even experiment and play around with how we can increase and notice more things like joy and wonder and love throughout our days, instead of just getting swept away or carried away by the negative. I think that awareness is step one, and noticing maybe where your mind tends to go can be a really helpful starting point. One of my favorite exercises to recommend to people is what I will recommend as the takeaway for today. And I call this my top 10 greatest hits exercise. And in essence, what you want to do is to maybe over the course of a week, or maybe even, over the course of a day or a month or however you want to do it, try to think about what are your top 10 things that you think about. We think something like 80,000, 90,000 thoughts every day. And something like 80% of them are the same thoughts as yesterday. So we really are recycling a lot of material in our minds. And as I discussed earlier, if we are biologically and genetically geared towards focusing on the negative, how many of those 80,000, 90,000 thoughts are going to be kind of negatively tinged, right? Whether it's anxiety or worry or fear or doubts or shame or any number of things. We're constantly thinking about those things if that's what's going through our heads and our minds. So, write down your top 10 list. What are the kind of topics or what are the kinds of things that you naturally think about? And having that list in front of you, I have had feedback from people that it can be really depressing and kind of disheartening to see that list because it's all negative. But I believe that's actually a really great starting point. If you can see, well, hey, this is my top 10 greatest hits list, and they are all negative, or 9 or 8 or 7 out of the 10 are negative. It shows you very clearly that you are thinking negative thoughts, or you are recycling these things in your mind over and over and over on various loops. And awareness is the first step. That's the vital key to bring awareness to, hey, this is what I keep going back to, or this is where my mind keeps going. By even beginning to bring awareness to it, you might be able to give yourself just that little pause or just that little space around it to recognize when it does come and to let it go. I think the other useful thing that can come from this kind of exercise is you see where you are thinking negative thoughts, perhaps, or you are kind of dwelling or ruminating on various things. And you can start to think about, maybe there's something more to those stories. Maybe it's not all negative. If you are a mother, for example, maybe one of your things, your top 10 hits, is your child. Maybe you're worried about some aspect of your child. I know that I am, at every phase of my child's life, both of my children's life, I'm going to be worried about various things. But maybe you can then think about, well, What are all of the wonderful, amazing, great things that my child is doing or has accomplished or has going for them? Maybe you can start to kind of loosen the hold of the story that you're constantly thinking about and start to see a little bit more. Start to kind of create a bigger bubble around what is actually happening. I think we tend to think in very black and white terms quite often, especially when we are feeling stress or concern or worry. But rarely are things so clearly black and white in life, even when we are in the midst of conflict with another person. They're not all evil, they're not all negative, they're not all bad. And I think if we can start to loosen up that kind of rigid thinking, the better it is for us in so many various ways. But so for today's takeaway, I encourage you to try and think about the things that you're thinking about and see what that list produces in you. What comes up seeing everything written down in front of you? And I would be more than happy to hear anything that does come up. I will leave all of my contact information in the show notes. And I do love to hear from listeners. If you are interested in working together and diving deep into your own negativity bias or learning more about the things that you can do to try and compensate for it by creating more positive emotions or shifting your mindset, I would love to hear from you. I thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate any ratings, comments, or feedback. And until I talk to you next time, take care.